Hello, everyone. Welcome to this is the actual fifth episode of Corky's Corner. So I apologize last week for that mistake. But yeah, we got quite a few topics. It's a little bit of the dead zone in terms of hockey. So we'll talk a little bit about hockey, then we'll move on more to a storytelling type debate, mostly centered around Star Wars. Joining me, of course, is my co-host, writer of Ice Cold and Deadly, working on the upcoming projects, the Gary Bettman Conspiracy and Seeking Sad Guru, my dad, Mike Corky.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here, John. It's great to be here, everyone.
Yep. Yes, it is. It's good to be back. It's good to have you back on the show for another edition of Corky's Corner. And Dad, you wanted to talk about a few contract signings, even though we're in the dead zone.
Well,
Uh,
just a little bit of late breaking news. I don't know if you were aware of this. You probably weren't because you're out walking your dogs. Um, is the Hurricanes just signed Tony D'Angelo for 1.1 million or something like that for 1 year.
I did
So,
see, yeah, I did see that, and I had honestly forgotten about it because we had known Tony D'Angelo was coming to the Carolina Hurricanes for months now. The
see, that's what I was gonna hit on is yeah, D'Angelo is sort of a an offensive defenseman in the mold of an Eric Carlson type, but this kind of takes the Canes out of the Eric Carlson running, in my mind.
I'd agree, although I don't think because Tony D'Angelo, I think he's going to be playing with Jalen Chatfield. I think that those two are going to work well together. He's basically a replacement for Gosh Despair because it's probably going to be Slavin Burns, which is a great defensive pair. That's why I don't think we need Eric Carlson, even though having the best defensive defenseman in the game and the best offensive defenseman in the game as a pair might be unstoppable, or it may not work out, but it's going to be one of the two. Orlov, Pesci, or Shea, probably Shea because they're going to move out um, one of the two, and then Chatfield and D'Angelo on the bottom six. So I think it doesn't necessarily take him out of the Carlson trade. I think with Pittsburgh being the front runner, Carolina's kind of trying to wheel and deal. I think they're probably trying to make it a little bit more difficult for Pittsburgh to get Eric Carlson. I think Carolina could still be in the running, but I think Carolina has adopted the attitude of, all right, we're not going to put all of our roster and other moves on hold for Eric Carlson at this point. So I don't think it takes him out of the running. I just think it decreases their odds of getting him.
Right. Okay. So I mean, that was kind of the main one. There's been a couple other signings here and there, but nothing really of consequence. So I'm gonna spring something upon you, just like you sprung something upon me last time. And I'll start so that you have time to prepare yourself. But I think we should discuss if because there's been rumors of the NHL going to potentially 34 teams, another expansion. And if Gary Bettman, being Little Weasel, he has sprung a expansion draft on the rest of the teams tomorrow, who would they protect if it was the same rules as the last time? So I'll start with the Oilers, and we'll look down their roster, and we'll talk about who we think the Oilers would
All right.
protect, and then you can talk about who the Canes would protect. So I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. You should be good to screen share this time. I came prepared.
Okay, so all right, so we'll go down the roster and see most teams. I guess the rules are if you're a first or second year pro, they can't do you can't be drafted. So the Oilers are now an experienced enough team that they don't really have a whole lot of those guys. If you look down their cap crunch here, really the main guys I think even Dylan Holloway would be eligible for an expansion draft. This him going into, I believe, his third year. So everybody on the Oilers roster is, I guess, and he's not even on here. Philip Broberg, he's still listed as starting in the minors, but I'll include him because I wouldn't protect him anyway. So um, I would say that obviously you've got McDavid, and you get seven forwards and 3D and a goalie, or you get eight skaters is the choice. So I'm going to go with McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Kane, Nugent Hopkins. That's five. And then I'm going to protect Dylan Holloway and Ryan McLeod. Connor Brown, I think, they just signed him and he's going to be, I believe he's going to be a really great player for them. But I wouldn't protect him if an expansion draft was sprung on me right now, because I don't think whoever was doing it would draft him anyway, because he's only got 1 year, and then he's UFA. So I'm not sure that that's the type of player that they would an expansion team would draft. On defense, I'm gonna go way off the rails here, and I'm going to. Well, no, I guess I have to because of the McDavid factor. McDavid loves Nurse and Draisaitl. They're the three amigos. So it's pretty simple. You got to protect Nurse, Ekholm, and Bouchard,
I
and then
think
Stuart Skinner is my goalie.
you can you also with the no movement clause, you would have to ask Darnell Nurse to waive his no movement clause, and because he could theoretically be taken. God, that
Right.
contract's terrible. And because he
It won't be by the end. It's hamstringing them a little bit now, but really what's hamstringing their cap is $5 million for Jack Campbell. That's really what's hurting them right now.
yeah.
If they didn't have that albatross, they'd be in great shape right now. So
Yeah.
okay, that's my list. Thoughts about that, and then have you come up with your draft expansion strategy for the Hurricanes right
I
now?
would agree. I'll ask you just to avoid any potential copyright. If you could just go into the Hurricanes tab on your screen share, I'll do that. I agree with that. I think you can't go wrong with protecting McDavid and Draisaitl. I would switch Connor Brown with not who was the other one? It was Dylan Holloway you protected, who I would keep
Ri-
protected.
Ryan McLeod.
Ryan McLeod. I would swap Connor Brown with Ryan McLeod for the same reason you would protect Darnell Nurse. Um, so it's that sort of thing for me. So if you could pull
Yeah,
up a
I'm just going to disagree. I think that any team that drafted Connor Brown after he just signed just a 1 year bonus laden contract specifically to play with Connor McDavid, would be a horrible idea, given that you'd be starting off on the wrong foot with that player. He would be so mad that you ruined that chance for him. I'm not sure you'd be getting what you wanted, and then he would be very quick to leave the team. So what have you done for yourself?
yeah, I guess that would be true, but they could basically the other team could have the power and try to call you and be like, "Hey, we're taking Connor Brown unless you can give us something." So, but going through the Hurricanes roster, so the players I would protect would be, let's see, does so you have to do Teravainen and Michael Bunting, as well as Jordan Stahl and Jesper Foss. So those four are there. And how many forwards do I have?
You get seven forwards and three defensemen.
Okay, so the only one I would potentially ask to waive his no movement clause would have been a Jordan Stahl. I think well actually no, you don't have to protect oh no, the only one you have to protect is Jordan Stahl. So Jordan Stahl you have to protect. Obviously Aho Svechnikov is on LTIR, so I can't protect Andrei Svechnikov. Um
I don't think you have to, but yeah.
But I'll say because he's not going to be on LTIR the whole season. So, Andy played enough games. I think it's close enough that I wouldn't risk him being off the board. If I don't have to protect him, that's a different story. But for right now, Aho, Teravainen, obviously Jordan Stahl, I have to. Uh, Seth Jarvis is another must for me. Martin Hs, you can't give up Martin Hs for free. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and I would say Jesper
Well,
Fast as well. So
you can't. You're over. Oh,
that's
you're
seven.
only.
That's
No, you
seven.
have Svechnikov, you do have to protect Svechnikov because it's a like the Oilers chose not to protect Oscar Klefbom, and he was on LTR for several years, and they chose not to protect him because he was on but if they were concerned about him being taken, they would have had to protect him. So you have to protect
Yeah, so Svetch, Teravainen, Aho, uh,
Stahl,
Stahl I have to protect,
Jarvis,
Natchez, and
Jarvis, and
Jarvis. That's six. And then
okay.
Jesper Foss was and then so it's between Kotkaniemi and Jesper Foss. I would say I would go with Kotkaniemi. I think because they're not going to take a forward in this expansion draft if you're Carolina. So I would take Kotkaniemi. They're not going to take Jesper Fast because he would be another one that would suck to give up. Jacob Slavin, the best defensive defenseman in hockey, I'd protect. That's a must. Uh, Brent Burns, I would actually take a gamble and protect Brent Burns because he's 38, but he clicks so well. He's fit right into the Hurricane system. Uh, and then it's tough. I wouldn't do Shea. I wouldn't do Pesci because they're looking to give one of them up anyway. Dylan Coughlin, no. Jalen Chatfield wouldn't be taken. So I would say Dmitry Orlov. Dmitry Orlov, I think, would be the one I would protect. Or Brett Pesci, depending on who the GM of the expansion team is. That being said, I do think it would be a big mistake for the NHL to go above 32 teams. But then coming up here with goalies, the one goalie I would protect would actually be Kochetkov. So just because I would say maybe theoretically Frederick Anderson, but I wouldn't want to lose Kochetkov for nothing. I think Kochetkov is the goalie of the future. And when it comes to expansion draft, I think protecting your future is the smart play. I do say that even though I did protect Brent Burns, but the way Burns is playing, it looks like he could be playing hockey for a long time. So
Right. So it looks like, my opinion is you would lose Pesci.
yeah, which he does free up $4 million in cap space. They don't look to want to re-sign him anyway, so it's not the end of the world. But yeah, it. I think. Oh, and then if I was the Oilers, I would protect Adam Larson. Oh wait, sorry, that's the wrong expansion draft.
Yeah, I would. I mean, it would suck to go through this again, but I thought I'd relive it just to see where, just to see how sort of unfair it is. I mean, you think like that Pesci is he's a really good defenseman to be getting in an expansion draft, and I suspect a lot of teams would be giving up similar type players. So that was fun. So I guess sort of
Yep.
on to our debate.
Okay. All right. Well, before we do that, if you were to pick the next expansion city for the NHL, if the NHL is going to go up to 34
We did this
teams.
already.
Oh yeah, that's right. It would be
And I would said it would be. Oh no, you asked me. Sorry, you asked me uh, where I would not be willing to go play.
yeah.
And
So
I said the Nordiques. Okay,
yeah.
so if I was picking I actually this came up on Twitter. I say unequivocally that there's no reason that Toronto shouldn't have a second team. That would be my pick for, of course, Maple Leafs would whine, because making 100, $200 million a year profit is not enough for them. So they wouldn't want to split even a penny with with an expansion team. But I think that if the tri-state area can have three teams and Los Angeles can have two, and plus, there's no reason that Toronto market couldn't support that many teams.
You know what's crazy about that area? You could put two teams in Toronto, one team in Hamilton, and still keep the Buffalo Sabres, and it would probably work just fine.
Yeah, and the thing is, the owners are they're short-sighted, even though they're obviously good businessmen to where they are, but they have a tendency to be short-sighted. And I was just listening to the radio this morning, and they were talking about how the Toronto Maple Leafs voted against the Edmonton Oilers coming into the NHL because they didn't want to split the national TV rights with Edmonton. You know, this sort of failure to understand that the rising tide lifts all boats is historically been an NHL problem.
Okay, well that was Harold Ballard, Dad. You can't
No, but
really,
no, no,
yeah.
but no, no, not just Harold Bell, Montreal also.
And Vancouver, they all voted
Well, they
against
were
it.
the only teams in.
Yeah,
Like they
I
were the
know,
only
but
they were the only three Canadian teams existing. So they all voted against them because they didn't want to split up any revenue. But as it obviously as it turns out, growing the league uh, makes the pie that much bigger. You're splitting such a bigger pie. The only reason Montreal let them in was because there was a people were boycotting a la Bud Light. They started boycotting Molson products in Canada, and the Canadians had to finally cave and vote in favor of the teams coming in.
yeah. Well, Boston didn't want a team in Connecticut either. They felt like they owned the rights to New England as well.
Yeah,
So both of our two favorite teams almost didn't join the NHL, which is kind of interesting when you look at it because of pettiness. But I would say for me it would be Houston in the West, or actually Milwaukee. I'll go Milwaukee because that rivalry with Chicago, St. Louis, and everything. So I'll go with, just to not make you go in a rant about another Sun Belt team for your sake. I'll go with Milwaukee. And then I would go with Quebec for 34. But I don't think the NHL should expand above 32 teams anyway. But on to the topic, and I'll let you kind of kick us off here on the topic we'll be discussing, which is Star Wars and storytelling related.
yeah. I just so we've been having offline this debate, and I want to put it out there for the whole world, for the 57 people that watch these, how wrong you are when you say that there should not be any more Star Wars movies after the Rise of Skywalker. And I cannot even imagine what would make you think that. First of all, the Star Wars franchises are only getting better. There's been such great content coming out that and I think they've learned some things. Why wouldn't you want to push the story forward? I mean, I think that bringing Palpatine back in The Rise of Skywalker was a stroke of genius, and
You're
I
an
think.
absolute buffoon.
What do you mean? I think
You're,
it, I think it was I think it was I think it was well played, and I think it was a little bit like a
oh my God.
sort of like a they just didn't execute. The idea was fine, but they didn't execute. It was almost like in the Terminator, how the Terminator, she thinks she finally killed him and he just keeps coming back or whatever. It really gave me that vibe of, okay, this guy, is he ever going to go away? And I think that was
Because
really an important
somehow
part of.
Palpatine returned. Somehow Palpatine returned.
Yeah, I think it was a good idea. So
That's
so
the worst line in the history of cinema.
what do you mean?
Poe literally says, they're like, oh, how did Palpatine return? And this is how they explain it in the movie. Poe, somehow Palpatine returned. It's the worst line in all of Star Wars.
Well, one line, okay, so it's a bad line. That's fine. That doesn't mean you shouldn't push the story
It's what that
forward
line
with movies.
symbolizes.
You shouldn't push the story. You're saying you shouldn't push the story forward because you made a misstep with a few lines in the actual show itself. But
But here,
just because they didn't fully execute that movie doesn't mean they shouldn't continue making Star Wars movies after the rise of Skywalker.
here's the thing. The characters, not because of the actors, like the actor who played Finn, John Boyega, amazing actor. Daisy Ridley in The Force Awakens gave a great performance as Rey. And the actor who played Oscar Isaac or Isaac Oscar, I'm blanking on how to.
Oscar Isaacs.
Oscar Isaacs did a great job as Poe. I have no interest in the characters because the writing completely killed those characters. Poe became a sim for Rey. Rey, who did not start out as a Mary Sue. People were accusing her of being a Mary Sue at The Force Awakens. I disagreed. Even in The Last Jedi, I don't think she was. But her story centers around Luke, the guy who didn't give up on his genocidal father being a good person. Like her story centers around Luke becoming a hermit who's given up on the world. That's the opposite of Luke Skywalker's character, which is another reason why. And then, not to mention, but like her character by The Rise of Skywalker was absolutely a Mary Sue. And I hate to say that because that criticism was overblown for the first two movies. And then by the third movie, I agreed. And then so you have that area there, and then you have Poe, who just kind of did nothing through all three movies, like literally no arc for him. They probably should have just killed him off at the end of The Force Awakens. And Finn went from being this amazing, having the best origin story possible, and they did nothing with it, and he just got relegated to being a sim for Rey. It's one of the worst things they've done with three great actors playing three characters with potential who could have been the next Han, Luke, and Leia. Were gone. Not to mention, Star Wars has a perfect ending. The ending to Star Wars is the end of Return of the Jedi when Luke fights Vader on the Death Star. Not to mention, there are a lot of other stories to tell, and Disney's best. First off, The Mandalorian is fine. It's not great, it's just fine. I don't think The Mandalorian is anything super special. But like, so even that, like, you can kind of do the Mandalorian thing. So if it's executed good, there'll still be an audience for it. I'm not saying that, but for me, the ending of Star Wars is that battle on the Death Star. Disney is at its best when it's doing stuff during the age of the Empire, when the Empire is in place with Andor, Rogue One. That's been the best projects I think Disney has come out with. That's Disney at its peak. And then you have the era of the prequels. The Clone Wars was really well done, but there's so much before the prequels and the storyline outside of Star Wars, so you don't have to focus on the Skywalkers. Even then, you can do Darth Bane, you can do the Old
Yeah, but that's
Republic.
fine. I mean, you can revisit some of it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to push the story forward. Because if you say, well, that's when Star Wars ended, was when Vader threw Palpatine into the pit or whatever. If you say that's when it ended, then you already know how all these other stories end, right? There's no they're still they're you're just basically filling in some history. And so I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't go back and revisit those stories. I'm just saying that you don't stop after the, oh well, we didn't like the way this movie turned out, it wasn't a great movie, so we're never going to tell another story after that. That's the universe doesn't just stop after, like, whatever, after Saddam Hussein was overthrown. Did Iraq just stop? No, that was the end of the Saddam Hussein story, but that didn't mean that Iraq stops. It keeps going. There's still more compelling stories to tell. I believe there's lots of compelling stories to tell.
Any story that takes place after Return of the Jedi, they had a gold mine. They had Harrison Ford agreed to come back to Star Wars, which is shocking because I genuinely think Harrison Ford hates Star Wars, which is fine. It's his prerogative. He still did a great job playing Han Solo, even in the sequels. Carrie Fisher came back. Mark Hamill came back. And even Mark Hamill, he's come out and criticized what they did with Luke's character. They had all three of the main three coming back. They got the actor who played Lando Calrissian later on. They had the goldest of opportunities in movie history to make money, tell a great story, continue the Star Wars story, and they botched it. You're never going to have a better opportunity to continue the Star Wars story in an amazing way than what they did with The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, and they just botched it. The
Yeah, but
most
you'll acknowledge that they didn't botch Andor, right?
They didn't botch Andor, but that's
Okay,
before.
so you take those. I know, but you say, okay, you learn from that. Okay, what did we do well? Because they knocked it out of the park. Okay, let's take that same grit. Let's, where people are actually, the stormtroopers are actually scary again. Let's take some of those concepts and let's just sort of not necessarily reboot, but let's sort of ignore a lot of the stuff that happened with Rise of Skywalker and move the story forward as well as telling the old stories.
You're not continuing the story forward if you're just gonna like put aside like it's in the same universe, but that's not continuing the same story. The same way Knights of the Old Republic isn't the same story as the Skywalker saga. Just because they take place in a different place in a timeline doesn't necessarily mean that the stories are all super connected and it's all one long story. They're different stories. House of the Dragon is a completely different story from Game of Thrones. And then you have it's just in the same universe in a different time period of that story. But sometimes stories come to an end, and for me, I don't think if they're gonna botch, if that's how they're gonna treat legacy characters, and I would even say maybe raise a legacy character at this point. Why do you want to see them continue to ruin legacy characters? This studio has shown they don't know how to handle legacy characters. They don't
Well,
really know.
then they could hire me because I know what I'm doing, right? So, and you could probably do a better job in some of the things that they've done. But let's look at it this way. So I view the core Star Wars story as the battle between the Jedi and the Sith. right? And I don't think that that ended with the Rise of Skywalker. All these other things, all these other stories, the Andor and the Mandalorian or whatever, they're part of the same universe and a really cool part of the same universe, but they don't really involve the Jedi versus the Sith as much. And I think that the core, like the Star Wars movies, should be that conflict between those two, and that can definitely continue on after the Rise of Skywalker. And you
Do
can do it with completely different characters, because in another generation, like you could say in another generation, well, the Jedi have kind of reassembled themselves, not necessarily in a position of power, but they could certainly reassemble themselves in a way that they become powerful again.
Or you
And
can just
when it
make Ray become a hermit. Ray can become a hermit who lost hope at after after her child went to the dark side, so she tried to kill the child just at the hint of the child of him turning to the dark side, and then Ray becomes a hermit. The Jedi's kind of followed, and then
it
they're at
could be
war
like
with
a, it could be
Second
like a
Order.
it could be
With the
like a
Second
buddy cop.
Order.
They could have a buddy cop feel to it. She's at home, she's pregnant with the kid, and and Poe comes out, like, I got one last job for us to do. Like, we got one last job, and then it could be like a buddy cop thing, and then that can push the story
Oh,
forward.
so you mean like what they did with Han Solo and Ray at the in the Force Awakens?
Yeah, not unlike that.
Literally what they did. Literally exactly what they did.
Just
Everything
execute.
you're talking about is exactly what they could have done with Han, Luke, and Leia, and they botched it so hard. Unfortunately, Carrie Fisher's passed away, so they're never going to have an opportunity like that again. So, like, literally, the universe is at the same place at the end of Return of the Jedi as it is at the end of The Rise of Skywalker.
All the
And
more reason to continue the story.
what story? It's over.
It's not over.
It's literally the Jedi vanquish the Sith at the end because Rey is now all of the Jedi. Don't forget that.
Well, so do you think the Sith are just like, oh well, we're vanquished, we're never coming back again? It doesn't
Palpat-
work that way. Just
Palpatine was all the Sith.
Like the Soviet Union and Russia. It's like we thought that the story didn't just end when the wall came down in Berlin,
Palpatine was
Germany,
all the
and
Sith.
and Gorbachev retired. That we thought they were on our side, and now Putin is just as big of enemy as the Soviets ever were. So
Palpatine was all
so
the
so
Sith.
then
So
so then why is the story doesn't end? And after Putin, there will be another another dictator, and the same thing can be said with the Star Wars universe. The story continues.
it's just like they had that opportunity with Snoke. Everything you're bringing up, they had a perfect opportunity to execute, and they botched it. They
All
did
right,
not.
everybody, you heard it here first. Star Wars is over. Jonathan Corky says no more Star Wars movies. Well, let it be told.
Hey, I'm not saying no more Star Wars movies. There's literally billions of years where they can chronicle a story. Knights of the Old Republic is like the biggest example. They're gonna do an Ahsoka. Thrawn's probably gonna be the main villain of the Mandoverse. And I mean, even I don't like the Mandoverse as much as other people do. I think it's fine. But you're gonna get a Mandoverse movie that's gonna put a bow on that universe, so Luke can become a hermit again. And then you're gonna have and then Thrawn's probably gonna be the main villain of that. You have, the formation of the Second Republic. You have another Clone Wars story you can tell. There's a lot of Star Wars stuff there. You don't need to continue the story after it ended. Like Star Wars, like the story has a perfect ending
Did
at
the,
the end
did
of
the
Return of
universe
the
blow
Jedi.
up? Did the universe explode? Did that galaxy explode?
No,
No,
but the
no.
characters
So
there
the
are
story,
over. You don't need
I
to continue a character in the same universe. Why? What justification? Like, why does it have to move forward for you?
it just that's to me that's storytelling. I love all the background information, but the past is the past. The stories, and you can tell those stories from the past in a way that help new movies push forward in the timeline. So I don't like storytelling. Like, as much as I love Better Call Saul, I watched that show religiously. It was appointment viewing for me after loving Breaking Bad so much. I couldn't get into it as much until they started going past what I already knew happened, right? Like, all the background stuff was great and fills in characters, but there has to be a move forward for me in storytelling that makes what they're trying to tell you not just, oh well, this is just sort of background. Backgrounds shows don't make successful shows. There has to be some hint of, okay, I'm gonna have to know something in the future that I don't already know.
Okay, House of the Dragon. Do you have any idea how Daemon's story ends?
Yeah, the what was her name? The queen gets killed by the dragon, or by Jon Snow, and picked up by the dragon.
No,
That's
do
how
you
the
know
house. That's how the House of
Damon
Dragon story ends.
No, that's not how the House of the Dragon story ends. It's a completely different story. Do you know how Daemon Targaryen's arc is going to end?
No, I don't.
Do you know how what's his name? He killed Lucerys at the end of the last episode. Um
I
not
don't.
Vis-
It's a
Viserys.
rhetorical question. I don't need to answer it. No, I don't know how any of that ends, other than it
Oh,
ends
so
up
is
in
that
this.
a brand
It
new
ends
there's a
up in the
brand new
story.
story.
Okay,
There's
but
a
you
brand
can
new
only go
story.
so far with that, because you know that the house line dies out with Daenerys
In
Targaryen.
200 years, does that really defeat the purpose? That's
A,
literally
li- a little bit, a little bit, yeah,
generations.
a little bit. Yep, yep.
That's generations of story, like right there that you can tell. You can tell the Blackfire rebellions. The
I
only
can just
period
tell you, I like the show. I like the House of the Dragon, but I will never like it as much as I like the Game of Thrones. Right? Like
no
it just because it's far too um, derivative for me to like it as much.
okay. Would you be more excited for what they did with House of the Dragon or with the Snow show that Kit Harrington's apparently thinking about making?
So they're gonna do what? Yeah, I would be a little more interested in Jon Snow's story.
I actually disagree because there's really no antagonist left for Jon Snow. Like you could maybe have a wildling cause some havoc of some kind, but like the thing is, the story of Game of a Song of Ice and Fire is over. I don't need to see them go through an industrial revolution. I think that would be the dumbest thing you could possibly do. But you're getting towards the end. If you want to try doing stuff that takes place after, you start getting into the industrial revolution, and I don't need to see a show that takes place during the Victoria, well, not industrial revolution, but Victorian times. I don't need to see Game of Thrones move into the Victorian times. I want it to be in the late medieval ages. That's where it should stay because that's the premise of the show. So, like, yeah, you can have like there's stories there that are packed that aren't even tied to the same thing. Better Call Saul is different from doing Knights of the Old Republic, from doing a Knights of the Old Republic show. Because Better Call Saul, it's about Saul Goodman, Gus Fring, Mike, and I think, yeah, those are the main three characters, and you already know how those characters end. However, you don't know how Damon's story is going to end. You don't know how Knights of the Old Republic is going to end. It's a very different story.
Yeah, I'm with you on. I'll watch all those stories. I just where we differ is whether the stories should end or not.
They
Like the
botched it.
the main the main line story should end, and so we'll agree to disagree. I know I'm right. I know you're wrong, and we can end the debate there.
All right. Well, at the end of the day, I'm right. So, but that is the end of this edition of Corky's Corner. I apologize for my dad's stupidity in this debate. So yeah, but we'll see you guys next week. We might try doing an all-time team draft. We might see if the Eric Carlson trade drops and Vladimir Tarasenko gets signed, those are or Patrick Kane. I think the rumor is Edmonton could be in on Jonathan Taves once Evan Bouchard and the other RFA they have is extended. My dad definitely would have opinions on Jonathan Taves coming to Edmonton. Um, so yeah, we'll stick around, and then by in those few weeks, we'll get into preseason hockey and everything. So a lot to look forward to in hockey, just not a lot going on right now. But if this Star Wars thing gets really successful, maybe we'll become a Star Wars podcast. But that's it for this one. Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you guys next week.
Stay horny, my friends.